Welcome, dear listeners, to a tale that begins with a simple walk along a riverside, a moment of peace that quickly unravels into something far more mysterious and dangerous. Imagine this. The sun is setting, the water whispers against the shore, and an ordinary man named Ethan stumbles upon a sight that will change everything he thought he knew about the forest, its secrets, and even himself. What lies ahead is a story of courage, betrayal, and the fight for justice, not just for one life, but for an entire ecosystem hanging in the balance. So settle in, because what starts as a quiet evening by the river will soon pull you into a world where nothing is quite as it seems. Let's begin. While taking a leisurely walk along the riverside, Ethan stumbled upon a sight that made his heart skip a beat, an animal paw, motionless, protruding from the chilly waters. Instinctively, he edged closer, ready to plunge into the water for a rescue, but a stern voice behind him froze him in his tracks, advising against any attempt to help. The reason behind this warning left Ethan pale as a ghost. Ethan's first instinct was just to ignore the stranger, telling him not to go into the water. He does not know this man and has no reason to listen to him, but he does clearly see that there is an animal in need of help. And considering how much of an animal lover Ethan is, the choice seems to be a no-brainer. But as he tries to jump into the water, the stranger pulls him back just before he is able to jump. Ethan starts to get angry and struggles to get out of the stranger's grip, but he quickly realizes that this man is a lot stronger than he initially expected. There's no way he is going to be able to get out of it, and Ethan has to watch as he slowly sees the unmoving animal paw sink deeper and deeper into the water until it is most definitely out of reach. Only when the animal was absolutely gone did the strange let go of Ethan. Ethan screamed in his direction, demanding to get an explanation. The mysterious man was stopped in his tracks and turned around. The man looked bad. His clothes were dirty, ripped, and old. Ethan guessed that this might be a homeless man who lived out his days in the forest, but that realization did not explain the action of the man at all, and neither did the response that he got from the homeless-looking man. "Just be glad I saved you." The homeless man bit those words to Ethan, almost spitting with anger. Then he turned around and continued walking into the forest, leaving Ethan behind, very confused to say the least. What the hell did that old lunatic mean by saying that he saved him from something? And in an act of almost desperation, Ethan walks to the water's edge to see if there is still anything he can do to help the animal. With one last glance at the tranquil surface, he stepped in, feeling the cold embrace of the river. The water enveloped him, cold and dense. He moved cautiously, mindful of the unseen floor below. He was here for a creature he couldn't save in time, driven by a need for closure or perhaps redemption. He progressed, driven by a grim determination to uncover the story of the lost animal. Just as Ethan began to feel the weight of his fruitless search, a distant sound pierced the quiet, the unmistakable hum of a car engine. What business had a car here, far from the beaten path? The realization that he was not as isolated as he believed dawned on Ethan as the vehicle halted at the water's edge. Ethan's heart raced as the car's occupants emerged, their presence shattering the day's tranquility. Dressed in gear that screamed forest authority, but with an aura that suggested otherwise, they approached the water's edge with purpose. Ethan, still waist-deep in the murky water, could only watch as the stranger's intentions unfolded with urgency, a stark contrast to the peaceful solitude he had been enjoying moments before. Shouts broke the air as the men spotted Ethan, their commands laced with an intensity that left no room for negotiation. "Get out now!" Confusion spiraled into fear when the glint of weapons became visible. Whatever their reason for being here, it was clear they meant business. Ethan complied, the cold water suddenly feeling even chillier as he made his way to the shore. Back on land, Ethan stood drenched and bewildered as the men continued to shout orders. Worse, smears of blood from unseen cuts marred his skin, a silent testimony to the river's hidden dangers. The men's urgent voices faded into the background as Ethan grappled with the immediate concern for his injuries and the lingering question of their aggressive arrival. Without a word, one of the armed men approached Ethan, snapping handcuffs around his wrists with an efficiency that spoke of routine. He was then pulled to his feet and pushed towards the car with a firmness that allowed no resistance. Ethan's mind raced with questions, but it was clear that answers would not be forthcoming from his captors. Ethan could only guess at their roles. Forest rangers, perhaps, but the presence of weapons suggested something more ominous. Their authority seemed unquestionable, their intentions mysterious. The car was through the dense forest, the silence inside so thick it was almost tangible. Gathering a shard of bravery, Ethan's voice shattered the quiet. "Can I please have my clothes back?" he ventured, seeking a shred of normalcy. The answer was a swift, silent refusal from the front passenger, a clear message that no comfort would be provided. This denial left Ethan feeling more exposed, both physically and emotionally, as he processed the reality of his vulnerability. Their journey concluded at an isolated ranger outpost, hidden even deeper within the thicket of the forest. The outpost seemed abandoned, a detail that heightened Ethan's unease about the intentions of his armed captors and the unclear reasons behind his forced isolation from the outside world. In a sparse, unfurnished room within the outpost, Ethan's brief interaction with the outside ended as his clothes were thrown at him before the door was firmly locked. Anger bubbled up in Ethan as he paced the small room. The lack of answers, the abrupt kidnapping, and now this imprisonment, it all made no sense. Hours ticked by slowly in Ethan's makeshift cell until the door creaked open, revealing a ranger with food and water in hand. As Ethan ate, he pleaded with the ranger for information, any detail that could shed light on his situation. The ranger's hesitation was the first crack in the otherwise impenetrable demeanor of Ethan's captors. "You won't be here long," he finally said, a statement that sparked a mixture of hope and confusion in Ethan. What did they plan to do with him? The ranger's next words caught Ethan off guard. "You were arrested for going into the water," he explained, mentioning a forest camera that had captured Ethan's unauthorized dip. The absurdity of the charge was not lost on Ethan, since when was swimming a crime in these parts? But the seriousness in the ranger's voice told Ethan this was no ordinary rule or regulation he had broken. "The water is strictly forbidden," he stated, leaving Ethan with more questions than answers. Why was access to the water so tightly controlled? "You shouldn't even be here," the ranger finally snapped, a veiled suggestion that Ethan's presence in the forest was the real issue. With those parting words, the door was slammed shut, the lock clicking into place once again, leaving Ethan in isolation. As the echo of the ranger footsteps faded through the small window, Ethan watched as the outpost emptied, each figure disappearing into the surrounding forest until he was left in complete solitude. The realization that he was alone, truly alone, settled heavily upon him. Any hope of immediate escape dwindled as the light outside began to fade, the forest around him growing quieter as night approached. Sleep claimed Ethan, offering a brief escape from his dire situation. However, it was short-lived. A sound unmistakable in the silence of the outpost jolted him awake. Footsteps. The building creaked under the weight of an unseen presence. Someone had entered, disturbing the precarious peace Ethan had found in sleep. His heart raced as he listened, trying to decipher the intentions of the night visitor. Then, the unmistakable sound of the lock being tampered with reached Ethan's ears. Fear gripped him. Could this be the end? Ethan's survival instincts kicked in. He scanned the room for anything to use as a weapon, settling on a sturdy piece of broken furnace. His grip tightened around it as the door began to open. As the door opened, Ethan braced himself for the worst, but the figure that stepped into the dim light of the room was not who he expected. There, standing before him, was the homeless man he had encountered by the river, the one who had warned him against entering the water. The man's expression was grave, urgent. "We need to go now," he said, his voice low but insistent. Ethan was stunned, disbelieved leaf mingling with a flicker of hope. But the gravity of the situation and the man's determined demeanor propelled him forward. Together, they stepped into the dimly lit corridor, moving swiftly towards the promise of freedom that lay in the unknown darkness ahead. Breaking out into the chilly night air, Ethan and the homeless man plunged into the forest's dense underbrush. The blackness of the woods swallowed them whole almost immediately. The sound of approaching cars filled the air, a clear and present sign their escape had not gone unnoticed. With no time for questions or hesitation, Ethan followed the man's lead, trusting in his unexpected ally as they navigated the perilous dark. Their hearts racing in unison against the threat of recapture in this moment of life and death. Trusting the homeless man wasn't just a choice. It was an act of survival, a necessary leap of faith into the arms of a stranger who now held both their fates in the balance. There, under the dense canopy of ancient trees, they sat in shared exhaustion, the weight of their harrowing escape and the enigma of the journey yet to unfold, pressing down on them like the very air they struggled to breathe. The homeless man's anger was palpable as he scolded Ethan. "I told you not to go in the water." Ethan's response was a quiet apology, laced with the guilt of his actions. He hadn't intended to cause any harm. His heart had led him to try and save the animal in distress. Ethan explained his actions, driven by a desire to help an animal in need, unable to bear the thought of leaving it to suffer. The homeless man's response was a mix of resignation and sadness, acknowledging the tragedy without providing the answers Ethan sought. It was a moment of shared grief for the animal and for the forest that had once been a sanctuary for all its creatures. Finally, the homeless man sighed, hinting at a deeper, more dangerous truth about the water. "It's very toxic," he said, leaving Ethan to grasp the gravity of his exposure. Looking down at his legs, Ethan was shocked to find them marked with red, irritated patches, evidence of the water's toxicity. The homeless man shared his story with Ethan, revealing that the forest had been his home for many years. He spoke fondly of a time when the water was clear and the land unspoiled. A few years back, the man continued, company began dumping toxic waste into the water, poisoning his home. Despite his efforts to alert the rangers, his concerns were dismissed, his warnings ignored. This betrayal of trust and duty marked a turning point, the beginning of a silent battle to protect the forest and its inhabitants from unseen, man-made dangers. The homeless man's tale grew darker as he revealed a web of corruption entangling the local rangers. Companies had bribed them to turn a blind eye, ensuring their toxic activities remained unchecked. This conspiracy silenced voices like his, voices that sought to defend the forest. Realization dawned on Ethan, regret for his initial distrust mingling with gratitude for the man's protection. With the homeless man's guidance, Ethan began the arduous journey back to the city. They moved cautiously, avoiding rangers and unseen threats, their path a testament to the man's intimate knowledge of the forest. Under the guidance of the homeless man's wisdom, Ethan navigated the forest's hidden paths, avoiding the dangers that lurked within. Their mission was clear: gather undeniable evidence of the toxic waste. Together they collected samples of the contaminated water and took photographs of the affected areas. Each step was taken with care and ensuring their safety while compiling the proof needed to expose the environmental crime. Back in the safety of the town, Ethan approached the local police, armed with the evidence he and the homeless man had gathered. Presenting his case was challenging, met with skepticism and bureaucratic hesitation. However, Ethan's persistence and the undeniable truth captured in the water samples and photographs gradually won over some of the officers. Support within the police force began to materialize, a small but crucial victory in the fight for the forest. The actions of Ethan and the homeless man sparked a citywide movement against the companies responsible for dumping toxic waste and the complicit rangers. A lawsuit was filed, rallying the community around the cause of protecting their natural surroundings. Meanwhile, the homeless man returned to his forest home, his identity as a guardian of the land now recognized. Both he and Ethan were hailed as heroes, their courage and determination inspiring a collective stand for environmental justice.